Coming to you from beautiful Merrifield, Virginia, in the shadow of the multiplex cinema, it's the Fairfax Sports Report. My name is Greg Wyshynski of the Connection Newspapers. Along with me, of course, BJ Kubaroulas of the Connection Newspapers and Jeff Graham of the Connection Newspapers. We are all here tonight for a momentous occasion. It's the big Week 1 review of Northern Region football and the big Week 2 preview of Northern Region football here on the Fairfax Sports Report. And lots and lots of fun and interesting things happening in the world of football. We're going to have a little field hockey tonight. We're going to have a little cross country tonight, and maybe even a little bit of NFL talk later in the episode. Before we get rolling, let's thank the folks that make this show possible every single week. We are, of course, talking about the Underwriters. The Underwriters being Quality Care Ford Service Center, conveniently located in Fairfax, servicing all makes and models, 703-383-6299. And CCI Screen Printing for all of your screen printing needs, 703-978-0257. Boys, before we get rolling with the football talk, let's talk a little bit about some happenings, some news and notes, if you will, from around the Northern Region. And BJ, I understand that the mighty Oakton Cougars have named the new softball coach to take over a program that's basically been one of the best in the state in the last couple of years.
At 25-3 last year overall, they won the district crown in the Concord for one of, I can't even count how many times, under head coach Chris Jarboe, who moved out to Idaho, I believe, or Iowa, I'm not sure. One of those crazy western states.
And why on earth would he move to Idaho?
Well, fell in love with a beautiful coach that we're all familiar with, would be Tammy Talley from over at Madison, their rival. So wow. Nice little beautiful love story. And they moved away together to start a life. But now Pat Purcell, many of them know him as the freshman football coach at Oakton High School, is taking over the head softball job over there. And Pat is homegrown and homespun, he said when I talked to him this week. He graduated from Oakton in 1976. He's been an assistant with the squad since 2000. His daughter played for him when he was a coach over there. Both his sons played football. His son Pat just last year owns the interception record at Oakton, and has another son Sean playing football for the Cougars this year, who I have slated to go all the way, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But anyway, Pat Purcell takes over as head softball coach over at Oakton, and he couldn't be happier to get the job. So.
And it should be said, you mentioned Madison's softball job. That job remains open.
Right.
And I think for a while, in the newsroom, we were kind of bantering about which job would be filled first. And you have to figure that the same pool of applicants probably applied at both schools, and maybe the Cougars looked over that pool of applicants and decided to stay within the school. I mean, obviously you're dealing with a lot of new rules as far as you can hire, who you can't hire, people in the school, people outside the school. So it's going to be interesting to see which direction Madison goes in their hiring.
Well, Oakton, I mean, right off the bat, Phil Levine said that he would stay. He was looking to stay within the ranks of his assistants. So that was something he said immediately, right when the job opened up. Just took him a while to fill it over the summer, but obviously they made the right decision and did what they set out to do, which was stay within the program.
Mm-hmm. We also have a bit of news about evacuees who may have moved to the area because of Hurricane Katrina. We'll talk about that later in the show when we deal with some disaster relief information we want to pass along to you. That'll come in later. Want to move now to Northern Region football. Week 1 is in the books. There was sort of an abbreviated week. A lot of teams had a bye in Week 1 versus having a bye later in the season. Let me ask you, Mr. Graham, if you were a football coach, which you're not, but if you were, would you want a bye in Week 1 or would you want a bye later in the season? There are teams in this region, Hayfield being one of them, that have a bye in the last week of the season. So it's almost like a bye week before the playoffs if they made it that far.
I think I'd want it in the middle, maybe before the start of district schedule. Just the sheer fact that you probably want to refocus, and you're probably going to be banged up a little bit. You get to rest some guys here. The only time you're going to be banged up is if you get hurt in practice. But I think middle of the year, that's where I'd want it. Beginning of the season, I know my kids would be chomping at the bit to get out there, and here they see some teams playing in Week 1, and meanwhile they're sitting home on Friday night. So I think I'd want it closer, maybe towards late October.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's sort of an interesting situation for these teams that have byes in Week 1. Obviously, it's another. Everybody had a scrim. I mean, it's a bye, but at the same time, a lot of these teams did have scrimmages in the off week, so it's almost like they don't have an off week. That being said, there might be something to having that extra week just to fine-tune things. Let's say you've got a young quarterback. I mean, an extra week to learn the offense, to get acclimated to your surroundings, to grow with your offensive line and your offensive weaponry, that could really be a benefit to where teams who had to sort of rush into the season, like these teams who played in week 1, maybe they needed an extra week to kind of fine-tune things a little bit. I mean, you look at some of the scores from week 1. I mean, obviously Hayfield scoring 7 points against a Westfield defense that we all thought was pretty susceptible to an offensive attack. Well, maybe that 7 points becomes 21 if they had an extra week for preparation. I don't know.
And I think maybe for some of the lesser teams, you need that early bye for some of the playoff-bound teams like the Robinsons, the Centervilles. They start off and they dominated week 1, and especially if these teams are going to be going late in the playoffs, I think to have a bye after week 7 and then prepare for a long haul where you could be playing 4 weeks after the regular season. I'd like to have it a little later, but it's all up to really the coach.
I think it depends on the team too. I mean, obviously you've got some pretty tough teams coming out in week 1 and making some statements in the Concord district. So, like Jeff said, it depends, I think, or myself, I think it depends on the team. I mean, like he said, playoff-bound teams should probably get it later in the season, but some of the teams that struggle a little bit, they maybe want to take it in the beginning of the season and see what everybody else is doing, too. That's one thing that we didn't touch on. I mean, you get to see what everybody else out there is doing that you haven't seen in scrimmage and scrimmage tapes and that whole sort of thing.
Yeah, and for some teams you get the benefit of getting game tape on your opponent, whereas you might have been sitting at home not playing. So it's a little added bonus.
And the interesting thing about the way that the schedule was built for the region this year is in week 2 you're dealing with a lot of teams that are playing each other who already have a game under their belts. I mean, you have Westfield and Annandale, Hayfield at Centerville, Woodson at Fairfax. All of these schools competed in week 1. And it's sort of nice to see them structure it that way, where you don't necessarily give the teams who played in week 1 a disadvantage by having them play a fresh team in week 2. It's sort of there was obviously an effort to try to match up those teams to make sure no one had an advantage going into week 2, which I think is great. I mean, I think that we all hear a lot of complaints from coaches about certain things built into the schedule or the way things are arranged, and it's good to see that there was something built into the schedule that kind of deflates any argument a coach might have about, oh, well, we were tired from week 1 and they didn't even have to play in week 1. One of those situations. So it's good to see them having done that. And speaking of week 1, let's take a look back at what happened in some of the games in week 1. Talking first about the Fairfax-Robinson game. Robinson 61 to Goose over the Fairfax Rebels. I did not expect that score quite to be as large as it was. And you look at the statistical breakdown of the game. You want to talk about a kid who came out and made a statement in week 1. Lucas Caparelli comes out. 6 touchdowns, 89 yards rushing, 98 yards receiving for that kid. Here is a player that is going to be in the mix for Player of the Year with a number of other kids in the region, Evan Royster, guys like that. What a statement in week 1 to come out and do that. And Fairfax is not a slouch. I mean, Fairfax is obviously a team that struggled in recent years, but you're talking about a team that was, around 5-5, that sort of team for the last couple of years, and a pretty respectable defense on that team too. And for him to torch him like that, boy. And one of those touchdowns came on a kick return, no less.
Yeah. And I think one thing I was surprised with, usually Robinson, when they do dominate opponents, you typically see touchdowns kind of spread across the board a little bit more. But one thing we were talking about in the office, one thing we were surprised with, quarterback Matt Goff, 3 of 4, and he passes for 169 yards and 3 touchdowns.
It's quite an impressive average that young man is carrying right now for yards per reception. Did you expect a score like that in week 1 out of Robinson? I mean, Robinson does have, we should say, a tradition of blowing people out, especially, even though Fairfax isn't in the Liberty District anymore. There'd be that game against Langley early in the season where Robinson would just leave with like a 150-0 score, and this was sort of a game in that mold. Did you expect them to beat Fairfax by this spread, though?
I didn't expect it to be that big a gap, but, looking back on it, obviously hindsight's 20/20. You look back on some of these scores, and we'll get to some other scores later, but a lot of them were gigantic margins of victory, and I think 3 of those big scores came out of the Concord district. So you got to wonder if it's the fact that, all right, this is the toughest district in the state. Let's go out and make a statement in week 1 and say we're the team to beat. Centerville had a big score, Westfield had a big, margin, and so you've got to wonder about, some of the other teams of the Concord that are playing this week, coming out in their first week. thinking they may have to make a statement too, like Herndon playing in South Lakes in the Barron Cameron Bowl. Obviously, we'll get to that later. But I mean, I guess looking back on it, it's something that probably should have seen coming. But these teams are definitely making statements.
Oh,
and individual players are making statements, like you said, Caparelli going out there and racking up the yardage, getting that high school Heisman, I guess, if you will. But
speaking of Heisman, I mean, this sort of thing, Centerville, Robinson, Westfield, all winning in blowout fashion in week 1. It's like old school NCAA football. It's like when Nebraska would go out and beat Bullweevil State 90-0 in week 1, just to get that point differential out there, just to get their ranking pumped up in the polls. And I mean, obviously we're dealing with different animals. There's no official ranking. Obviously the connection ranking is pretty darn important, but it's not official. But that being said, I mean, it is, like you said, a statement. It's a statement to go out there and for Centerville to beat and dominate Woodson like they did. I mean, Centerville had a 63-0 lead in that game. I mean, that's domination. That's completely blowing your opponent off the field.
I think it just speaks to the fact that, I mean, when we were talking about the top 10 poll this year, we pretty much knew who was in the top 4, maybe top 5. The level between, the top teams and the some of the, maybe good teams or mediocre teams is just, it's just, a great margin. I mean, a team like Hayfield, who we normally think is a, pretty decent team, of, borderline playoff contender, they lose by 36 points to Westfield. I mean, a team like, Fairfax, I didn't expect them to lose by that much. I think it just shows how good those top 4, 5 teams really are.
Right, and of course the point is that all we have the preseason top 10 that we put out. 4 of the top 5 teams are Concord District teams. So obviously it's not the end of the world for Hayfield to lose one of those teams, because they're going to go back to the Patriot. They're going to play the T.C. Williamses and the West Potomacs of the world, and that's the sort of level that Hayfield can compete at this season. They're a Division 5 team after all. But
I think it speaks to the fact that, I mean, once you get into playoff time, I mean, you're going to have to beat one of these teams, and
Well, Hayfield won't, but other teams will. Right,
Yeah.
exactly. It's a good point. I mean, West Springfield obviously was probably taking notice of the scores that were put up last weekend by these big Titans in the Concord district. And by Titans, I don't mean T.C. Williams. I mean Titans, and they're really good teams. Hayfield and Westfield, we've been talking about this game. Let's break it down a little bit. You and I, Mr. Graham, both thought that Westfield's defense might be a little bit suspect this year. What does this say about their defense to come out and keep Hayfield, a pretty good offensive team, option offense, 2 good receivers, and a really athletic, explosive quarterback in Evan Eo? They held them to 7 points. What does that say?
I mean, I think it says a lot. I mean, Hayfield did come out and score first. They got the kickoff, and they scored a touchdown first, and then Westfield rattled off 43 straight points. I mean, it could be just the fact that they're really not sharp early on in the season. I know Annandale was a team that we thought was a pretty good team, and they get blanked by Chantilly on the road early in the year, and I think it's just a case of maybe these teams are going to be a little bit better early on, but right now they're just not functioning, and for Westfield, I mean, Evan Royster has another great game, 195 yards on 12 carries.
Yeah, his yards per carry right now is 16.3.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the kids in week 1 had between like 9-10 yards, a clip, and even some of the receivers had. I think Caparelli had 2 catches for almost 100 yards. So
yeah,
a lot of yardage, and I think it's one of these things too where it's hard to tell how good a team is in week 1. You haven't seen them over the course of 3 or 4 weeks to kind of tell what they can do, and to match Hayfield against Westfield, you're not gonna get a whole lot as far as defining how good the Hawks are.
It must be a nice luxury to have a running back you can just give him the ball and never have a second down.
I think his touchdown runs were 2 over 50 and 1 over 30. So.
It's incredible. And again, not to be outdone, we talked about Caparelli having a big game in week 1. Royster 195, and the touchdowns he had, no slouch. I mean, these are the 2 players that have sort of been earmarked as the Player of the Year contenders, and both of them came out strong in week 1, which is great to see. Annandale and Chantilly.
Oh boy.
Well,
Go ahead.
I don't like to gloat, but I did happen to pick the Mighty Chargers in this game in a big upset. And lo and behold, they pitch a shutout against the Adams for their first win in well over a year. Obviously, they were 0-10 last year. I'll tell you why I picked the Chargers. I thought that Chantilly, from all reports that I was getting, is an extremely talented team that was just stuck in a complete mire last year. They just could not get out of the funk they were in. There was a lot of internal problems with the team. And I think that with a sort of a clean slate heading into the season, I was pretty confident that they were going to play extraordinarily well in week 1, looking to get off the schneid. Annandale, not as strong as last year, lost some people, trouble on the lines. 10-0 win. You take it. It's a big win for them.
And for Coach Lally, Michael Lally was hired, just a little over a month ago. It's a good win, a good way to start out in that community to kind of get a win under his belt. And for Annandale, it's a team that they surprise you, year in and year out. Last year they beat Centerville early on in the season, and this year you expect, probably bigger things from them, and they come out and lay an egg against Chantilly. So. Don't know what to expect out of the Adams now. I mean, they could bounce back in week 2, or they could finish with a 2-8 season. Who knows?
Did Lally give you any insight this week as to what the trick was in this game?
I mean, not really. He said, they have the tape from Annandale's game last year. He says, Coach Adams over at Annandale, he does a lot of the same stuff. He says, here's what we're going to do. If we can, outperform you, then we'll win. But he said that the kids made tackles like they should, and they just played real solid ball. And he said the kids are real relieved to get the win. So they're going to be going up against Lake Braddock in week 2. So that'll be another big game for them.
One thing I found impressive about the Chantilly win, obviously it was only a 10-0 win, so you're not going to have outstanding statistics. But just looking at it on paper, there really weren't any outstanding, in the case where we keep stats and whatnot, there wasn't really anybody who really stood out. Obviously, the quarterback Nathan Warwick, I believe, he completed some passes, and they had a couple guys run for, I think, over 50. One guy ran for over 50 yards, I think, if that was the correct stat.
Actually, I think as far as the post was concerned, the biggest gainer had I think 19 yards on 12 carries. So it was one of those things where you're like, all right, how'd they score points?
Exactly, and then they had one guy, who ran for took one carry into the end zone. So, I mean, you have a bunch of guys eking it out with no outstanding statistics, and that's how they pull it out.
But, for Lally, he was a defensive coordinator last year, so it's like, to get a shutout in week 1, that's right up his alley.
Right up, exactly. And if they're going to do it with defense, if you're going to build a program and you're in the Concord district, that's a good place to start. Because you're not going to be able to outgun many people in the Concord. So if you can build yourself a good, strong defense, then you might make some waves. And it's good for Chantilly. It's good for Chantilly as a school to have this happen at the beginning of the season, to continue to try to transition to a new era in Chantilly sports. I mean, we've chronicled over and over again what's happened at that school in the last year, and it just makes you feel good to see a team come out and break a losing streak and do it in this way and get a good upset in week 1, like you said. Now, the question is, what will they do in week 2? Which we'll get to in a second. I do want to make mention of one more game that I covered on Friday night, which was Edison and Lee. And Edison came out and beat Lee 28-7. And it was obviously the big hullabaloo about it's the Franconia Bowl, and these two teams are geographic rivals, and Vaughn Lewis is the father and Chad Lewis is the son. But the biggest story to come out of that game is the fact that Edison clearly established itself as the class of Division 5. I don't think that there's another team in Division 5 that has the offensive weaponry that the Eagles have. Sean Lloyd at quarterback looks pretty steady, and that's good because he was sort of a question mark in my eyes because he was a backup last year. He moves into a starting role this year. Justin Smith at wide receiver was explosive, 114 yards receiving on 6 receptions. And the running game, to me, was what was very interesting because they were going to have a good running game coming into the season, but the question was, how was it going to look with KK, Mr. Kyle from Paul VI transferring over to Edison. He lives in the Edison School District. He came over to Edison before the season. And this guy is a great fullback, great up back, and that adds a dimension to Edison's game that I quite frankly haven't seen for the last 5 years in covering him. He is a power runner to go along with a lot of other speed in the backfield, and that's going to add a real big dimension to that team. And it's something that a lot of other Division 5 teams aren't going to be able to handle. The only team that I can see in the National District giving them a game is going to be Yorktown, and that all depends on whether or not Yorktown's defense gets itself together. They played Wilson in Week 1, Woodrow Wilson from D.C., and they won the game 28-20, but they almost blew the lead in that game. The good news is that their running back, Maximilian, had a great game, 20 carries, 182, 2 touchdowns. But the question is going to be whether or not that defense can step up and compete against Edison when those two teams play.
Yeah, and I think as we talked last week about the National District, we pretty much thought that Edison was the cream of the crop.
They rise to the top.
And they do. And I think we said Yorktown and maybe Loudoun Valley, a couple teams that could challenge, and I think they're good teams. And if you're a good team in the National District, usually that'll get you 6, 7, 8 wins. But I mean, to be a great team, I think when you look at it, Edison has the parts to be a great team, and going against some of those teams, they should get some easy wins. Lee, not an easy win, but they had a pretty convincing win over the Lancers.
And it's going to be interesting to see what that defense does against some teams that are going to challenge it offensively. I mean, Lee took the tack that they wanted to keep Edison's offense off the field as much as they could, and at the end of the day, what you have is one team trying to play ball control and clock management. They weren't able to move the ball, and once you run the ball into the middle of the line 25 times in a row, the defense kind of knows where you're headed.
Right.
So I'll be interested to see what would happen if Edison was matched up against a team with a more balanced attack. But that said, I mean, what kind of attack do you need if you have an offense on the other side of the ball like Edison has that's going to be able to go out there and blow the doors off of half the teams in the region? It's going to be a fun team to watch, that's for sure.
I'll tell you, most coaches would kill for one running back that can run for over 100 yards in a game, and looks to me like they got a combo of two guys that
They
can
do.
just tear it up.
They do,
So
and it's a pretty potent attack. It absolutely is.
you're thinking about two players trying to stop two players rather than just trying to stop one.
Well, they're very reminiscent of the Westfield team from a few years back, where they have two guys in the backfield. They've got a pretty competent quarterback, it seems like, although Glennon was obviously better than Lloyd is, and they have a few options at wide receiver, and it's a very, very tough offense to defend because they do have so many weapons. And I was really impressed by him, really impressed. As Coach Vaughn Lewis said in his little post-game chat with the team, the sky's the limit. And I do agree. I think they're a team to watch in Division 5. Let's talk about the games coming up this week. And let's begin with Chantilly at Lake Braddock. This is a game between two teams that went 0-10 last year. Obviously, Chantilly is off the schneid. The question is, can Lake Braddock get off the schneid?
Well, Lake Braddock's playing at home, so you got to feel like they're going to be pumped up for that one. And Coach Lally at Chantilly says, hey, we're not taking any team for granted. When you're an 0-10 team, you can play Wakefield and not take it for granted. But he expects to go in there and have a real tough fight on his hands. Lake Braddock's going to be looking for their first win under Coach Poitras. And it's not like Chantilly, completely dominated Annandale in week 1. They still only scored 10 points, had some trouble running the ball. So Chantilly does have some work left, and I expect this to be a real close game. I think when we were picking games this week, this was one of the closer matchups for us.
It should be said that both of you knuckleheads picked Chantilly. I on the other hand, picked Lake Braddock. I think Chantilly is running into a buzzsaw this week. I think these Bruins want to get off this streak in the worst way. They have such a bad taste in their mouth after last season. And to me, the difference could be as simple as Chantilly coming from a game with so much emotion in week 1, not being able to get back to that level in week 2 against a team that's fresh and a team that is looking to get out there and has been chomping at the bit for the last month to get out there and change the momentum of that program.
Well, you took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, basically, Lake Braddock is the Chantilly of last week.
Wow, you just blew my mind.
I blew your mind, son. But really, I mean, they are. I mean, they're looking in a mirror right now, and Chantilly better think like they are Chantilly of last week, because they can't get too high on the highs and, like coaches love to say, too low on the lows. But really, they have to get back to that grit and level of, we got to have this win, because Lake Braddock is going to bring it, because they're an 0-10 team, just like Chantilly was coming into this week. So, like you said, they're chomping at the bit. And
it should be a fun game, and Braddock is making this an event. I mean, they're going to have a sort of a pregame party celebration kind of thing before the game. It's going to be a big deal, and I think that community is ready is just as ready as Chantilly to turn their fortunes around. So that's going to be a fun game to watch, as is the annual grudge match between South Lakes and Herndon. This year it's at Herndon, the Barron Cameron Bowl.
Yeah, call it a grudge match, but it's only one team holding a grudge right now.
Well, even the Redskins and the Cowboys are a grudge match, right? I mean,
it's a grudge match, and maybe it's some bad blood between the two teams, but they're so close to each other, and a little bit of rivalry that they have fun with. But man, I'll tell you, Tommy Myers 13-2 in that rivalry since he's been at Herndon, since 1990, and that's pretty tough for South Lakes to look at every year. Look at that record grow and grow and grow, and they're 6-1 since 1998. So put it this way, there's one kid on South Lakes, Dan Cunningham, he's a lineman, all right, who played up as a freshman for South Lakes, that knows what it's like to beat Herndon. They haven't done it in that long. So, Coach Ellenberger's got his hands full, but they've got some players. They've got, 3 guys at South Lakes that can torch you if you give them the ball. They got Gabe Itoka, Mike Forna, Tony Kanate. Those 3 guys, thunder, lightning, and speed. So you've got just every type of back hitting you. And
thunder, lightning, and speed.
Thunder, lightning, and speed. Kanate's a speedster, and that kid has got a couple district and regional placements in track.
That other famous meteorological phenomenon.
Exactly. But I tell you, Herndon seems to have the guns again. They graduated both their running backs, Solomon Heed Williams and Marcus Blaha, who combined for nearly 1,372 yards last year with 23 touchdowns. That's hard to replace, but Meyer, being a run-oriented guy, is going to get somebody in there. They've got a couple kids that they're looking to fill that role: Chris Thompson, Daniel Brooks, and DeAndre Richardson being the youngest of the group. But Tommy said earlier this week, he said this is a good problem to have. 3 guys. I don't know who's going to perform. See who performs Friday night, but. A key thing for Herndon is that they've got a quarterback, Zay Lopez, who John Ellenberger knows over at South Lakes on the other side. He knows they've got to stop him because, unlike other years, Herndon being a running a team, they've returned a quarterback and a couple of receivers in Daniel Chevalier, Matt Seeger, C.J. Glenn, and a big-body tight end, Danny Jones, who they might have the full package if one running back steps up. So last year's score was 34-0 in favor of Herndon. So,
and I think the year before that was 50-0.
Yes.
So South Lakes hasn't even scored in this rivalry in the last 2 years.
Yeah. So it's
I think the Seahawks are cooked.
It's something. Hey, I tell you, don't rule them out though. Don't rule out South Lakes. They've got a couple of players that if they get the ball and do what they're supposed to, they got a quarterback, Amir Gabriel, who's if he performs, you never know what can happen. So. Don't write off the Seahawks just yet. We'll see if they get in there and give Herndon a run for their money.
Jeff, you've put in your time in this rivalry. What's your take on it? What's your vibe right now about this game this year with these two teams?
The year that South Lakes won a couple years back was the year they won the Division V title, and they had some athletes. South Lakes has never had great numbers on the football team, but it was Joe Tribuco's first year. They won a close game.
Good quarterback that year too.
At Herndon, yeah. Danny Sedone, William Bussey, David Lansdowne was a great defensive player for them. And even that was a close game. It came down to the last possession. So I think that the talent is clearly on Herndon's side. I mean, you never know. I think Herndon's probably a little down over the past couple, compared to the last couple seasons. But I mean, I see this as pretty one-sided. I'd be surprised if South Lakes could. Maybe they can even score this year. That'd be good.
Well, speaking of geographic rivals, it doesn't get much closer than the W.T. Woodson Cavaliers and the Fairfax Rebels. The Battle of the City of Fairfax, or whatever the heck they call it, at Fairfax this Friday night. It's going to be a very, very big deal. It's sort of a big celebration of football because it's the first regular season game that will be played on Fairfax's synthetic turf field, which is kind of a cool thing. This was a very close game last year, and I'll tell you, man, I'm looking at these pigskin prognosticator picks. Across the board, we took Woodson. But I think we were all in agreement that, Fairfax is right there in this game. I mean, maybe it's based off of the fact that Woodson got their doors blown off them last week against Centerville. But
and it was only a little less than Robinson, drilling Fairfax.
Yeah, but to me, I mean, exactly. And that's the other problem with the Fairfax thing is that they also lost a pretty big game. But to me, this was a very, very tough pick.
Yeah.
Very, very tough pick. I mean, you're looking at a Woodson team that is dramatically different than last year's team. Fairfax gave them a game. Fairfax obviously brings back a lot from last year. It's a tough game to pick.
I think in my case it was just a sheer fact that Woodson was returning champion, and a lot of times I'll give the team the benefit of the doubt. It's hard to I couldn't really tell much from the first week games. Getting blown against Centerville, every team I think this year is going to face that threat that you're going to get blown out by the Wildcats. So that was my take.
It
I
should
don't
be
really have a reason for picking them. I just kind of picked them.
It's gonna be a fun one though. I think this is a game that can go either way, and I wouldn't be shocked if Fairfax won the game.
And I think it's another game too this year where it's like you don't have to go to a center of a Westfield or a Robinson. You know, there are going to be some good games between teams that maybe aren't playoff contenders, but I think this is one of those games.
Next game we're going to spotlight is Lee at Langley. Now Langley is, by all accounts, the favored team.
By some accounts.
Yeah, by our accounts.
In the Liberty District. Well, it's that one-star talent they have on the
Right.
team. Okay.
Let's not go there.
Langley begins the season in week 2. Lee played in week 1. They lost to Edison. And watching Lee do their thing against the Eagles, it occurs to me that this game could go one of two ways. Either Lee is this team that is just going to
try to play the slow
down. Play this slow down kind of offense, or they're going to be able to open it up a little bit more against Langley because they're not going to be as concerned about the explosive nature of the offense they're playing. And I hope that's the case. I hope that there's more dimension to Lee's offense than what I saw last week. I think there is. They've got a really good running back in Brandon Cameron. They've got a quarterback in Greg Jones that can make some plays. So maybe you see their offense open up a little bit more, but you've been a guy who's been a big believer in Langley all preseason. What do you expect out of him this week?
Well, I mean, if what you tell me from last week with the Edison beating Lee 28-7 and Lee trying to run it through the line, if that's what they're planning on doing this week against Langley, I got news for them. It's not going to happen because they've got some linemen over at Langley, which is the reason I've been touting Langley. Averaging over 260 pounds, I believe, and over 6'2" or something in that nature. These guys are just gigantic, and but they're fast too. So it's going to be hard to find the corners, even so. So they've got to, like you said, they've got to find some dimension to that game, or those linemen are just going to eat them up, and it's going to be tough for those guys to just drill it through if that's what they think they're going to do. So. I mean, Howerton's got his boys on the weight program that we mentioned last week, and it's paid off. And some other publications, if we will, don't have Langley doing so hot. But don't sleep on the Saxons. They look good this year, and I think they're going to have a running back who's just going to step up, and they're keeping them kind of secret over there. But with those big linemen on both sides of the ball, closing down gaps for the defense and opening up holes on offense. You may see not Trevor Bacon-like numbers, but you may see some numbers close to that.
It should be said that in our predictions this week, we all agreed that Langley would win. Our partner in crime, Rich Sanders, picked Lee, and he was 9-1 last week, my friend. Well, then again, so was I. I don't.
That's true.
Like to brag, but
Is that your horn, or is that you tooting?
I did toot, my friend. Toot all the time. South County at McLean. We didn't pick this game. And I thought we didn't pick it because I thought that if we had put it as a game that the prognosticators would select, that everyone would pick McLean. Well, but evidently there's some thought that maybe the South County Stallions may have a little luck this week against McLean.
I think Pete Bendorf's got some magic over there. It's hard to tell. We haven't seen Pete around, for a couple weeks. Hopefully he's going to make an appearance, soon. But I think South County. It's hard to say. It's hard to say what they have over there. I know they got some young kids and. From what I hear, they have a pretty good punter, so he might get a workout this week. But McLean, not the strongest team in recent years, so why not take a flyer on the
Just saying,
Stallions?
whatever can happen, can happen.
Hey, now, don't sleep on the Highlanders.
I was talking to a coach before the season from South County's district, and he said that he didn't think South County was going to be good to begin with, and I can kind of see that. I mean, you're dealing with a team with a lot of JV talent. That'll be varsity talent one day because that's what JV talent does. They mature and become varsity talent. I think at the end of the season, like this coach said, this team is going to be pretty good. Right now, I don't know. I don't know if this team could beat McLean. If they do, whew,
right,
man, I don't know, man. Then all of a sudden, what are we dealing with here? If this team comes out and gets a win in its first game against a team with a second-year head coach that isn't that bad, wow.
Well, I think it's a good game for South County to get their bearings and kind of figure out how to get on the field at a varsity level on Friday nights and bang around with another team. But I mean, McLean's got some weapons. They've got a really good receiving core returning. They got a quarterback stepping up. That they've got two guys that they're looking at, and they won't really reveal who's going to be the guy. And Coach Rivera is telling me that it's going to be a gut feeling Friday night, but my gut feeling says they already know who it is. They just don't want to tell. But that's football for you.
And my gut feeling is that it's going to be hard for South County to win this one.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to get too deep into McLean, South County. I think we know which way that's going. But
Fair enough.
I've seen crazier things happen.
That's true. We all have. Before we move on to the FSN Cox 35 Game of the Week, let's talk about the Marshall Statesman for a second.
Yeah.
Now, Marshall, before the season, when we were doing previews and we were trying to figure out where the pieces fit in the Liberty District, there was one piece that was missing from the puzzle. And you found out what that piece was last Friday in a game against the mighty Washington Lee Generals.
Well, when you do your previews and you call your coaches, and we talked about this a little bit last week on the show, we said a lot of them like to hide stuff. And I don't know if it was so much a case of Coach Biddison at Marshall hiding a player, because Marshall's really not known for having many marquee players. But I think it was a case of, well, let's see if this kid performs to the level that we think he can. And boy, did he ever Friday night. His name's Jordan Colbreth. He's a senior. He played freshman and sophomore year, did not play his junior year, decided to focus on basketball and baseball, and then decided to come out on the first day of practice. He got a phone call from his friend Vince Reese. First morning of practice, said, "Hey, why don't you come play?" He had played in the passing league, and that Marshall had won and stood out. But Marshall came out and Colbreth performed, and let alone head coach Biddison was correct on his assertion that this was his secret weapon. 24-0 win over Lee, in which Colbreth had he averaged 8.2 yards per carry. He had 97 yards rushing. He caught, I think, five balls for 77 yards. He had a 42-yard touchdown off an interception, a 42-yard option run touchdown, and we already mentioned the interception.
He's like a little baby Percy Harvin.
Did it on every side of the ball and was just all that he was billed to be. And talked to him after the game, and not a guy that is one of your, I guess, athletes of this day, if you will say.
Trash talker?
No, he doesn't.
Yeah.
He's just a really humble, nice kid. Shy even, but when he gets out on the field, he's not shy at all.
Yeah.
And it was impressive to watch him. Little side note on him: his dad played football at USC with the Juice, so thought that was being
O.J. Anderson.
Orenthal James.
O.J. Simpson.
Right. So.
Okay. Well, I'm dealing with Giant fans here. I mean, there's only one Juice for Giant fans, right?
But you've got to look at Marshall and say, wow, they open up 24-0 shutout. There was so many milestones in that game you can't even count. I mean, their first shutout you can't really count the shutout last year. It was 8-0 over Stewart with a lucky touchdown. It was just a big win for that team. They needed it. They haven't opened up the season 1-0 in so long. And looking at the Liberty District rankings this year, at this moment in time with all the bye weeks, Marshall, you're 1-0.
Yeah, that's right.
And you are at the top of the Liberty District.
And the only other team that played 0-1 Woodson, Division 5
the champion last year.
Hey,
exactly.
let them enjoy it. Marshall, you are at top of the Liberty District, so celebrate and enjoy it.
It's
while
all
you've got
upside
it.
down and topsy-turvy.
Hey, and I've got them opening the season 3-0 now.
You certainly do.
Remember that.
And speaking of Stewart, I've got them losing to George Mason Single A High School.
Oh boy,
in my upset of the week.
Who took out Dominion in a
I know.
pretty impressive
Pretty good
victory. So.
The Cox FSN Cox 35 Game of the Week is Madison at Oakton, the Outback Bowl or Challenge or whatever they're calling it these days. Outback has something to do with it, which means that when you go to the game, it's going to smell good.
Probably.
Exactly.
And
Not like the Outback, mind you, but like a steak.
Yes.
Right.
And our handbook at the Connection newspaper says we are not allowed to accept any sort of free gifts or foods, but I will be looking to eat.
Right. But no, I mean, that's a good point.
So
but
if you see me, give me a steak.
And
No.
people don't understand that usually. Like, we're not allowed to take gifts, but if we find a steak,
Right.
like on the road or in our car.
Or if someone were to put one down next to me in the press box or on the field.
Right, and then they say, I will count to 10. And if it's 10, the steak is still here.
Let's get serious here for a second on this game. I'll tell you, Outback Bowl, they should call it the Backyard Bowl because these two teams are so close to each other they could be in each other's backyards. And that's how they're going to treat this game. Like backyard football, they're going to beat each other up. Let's leave it at that. Warren Anderson's a quarterback over at Madison. Just a really big athlete that they're really impressed with over there. He can do it all. You know, he can run, he can pass. A little interception prone last year, but they said he's had a year to grow. He's did some off-season stuff and trying to get that under control. But, you know, I've been saying it all year, and I'm going to say it again, and I'm going to keep saying it. Oakton is an incredible team. They've got all the pieces. You look at that roster, and they are senior and junior loaded. It's very rare to even see a sophomore on that roster. They've got 8 seniors that have 22 starts under their belts already. Think about that. They've already played in 22 varsity games. They've been playing with Coach Thompson since his first year at the helm. A couple guys to mention. Kevin Houghton's throwing the ball for the Cougars this year. Keith Payne running the ball, running back. Impressive. Last year in this rivalry game, he had 126 yards on 15 carries. So talked to Warren Anderson over at Madison, and he said that's somebody that they obviously have to keep an eye on. If they stop Payne, you can't go as far as saying it's going to stop Oakton, but it'll be at least one of the things that they need to do to be successful. Fullback Taylor Nalepa, another guy. He says that Oakton, like I've been saying, he reaffirmed that for me. Oakton is better in the backfield this year than they were last year. And you know, we know they finished 9-1 last year, and just incredible. One more guy to mention: Donald Murphy is a kicker over at Oakton. Incredible special teamer, can do it all. So if I had to pick it, obviously I'm going Oakton. But I know that these rivalry games get heated, and you can't write off Madison. They're going to get in there, and they're going to brawl, and they know they're going to brawl, and everybody over there is real excited about this game.
Indeed, and it's always a great crowd. It's always a great atmosphere. It should be noted that of the 9 pigskin prognosticators in the Connection newspapers, 7 of them have selected the Mighty Cougars this week to knock off Madison. So, you know, I think there's something to that.
Oakton's 6-1 in the last 7 games against Madison.
Yeah,
So that
and you're
speaks
talking
for
again
itself.
D6 versus D5, the whole
Yeah.
bit. But like you said, rivalry games, funny stuff happens. So
Hey,
you never know.
D6 versus D5, you know, it's football, and Gordon Live knows that over at Madison. And it's something he said earlier in the year. If we can get 2 wins against, you know, some D6 teams, we'll be in good
Those
shape.
kids will be marching.
So
That's
for
true.
sure.
Oh, they will be marching after the. Oh, they go
Gotta watch
fast.
out.
Right there, and they're gone. Whoosh. So, anyways, boys, it's not just a football world. It really isn't.
No, come on.
No, it's not. I'm serious. I've studied this. There's field hockey. And in fact, the Bulldog Invitational was finally held after some weather delays. Tell us a little bit about it, Mr. Graham.
Well, it was held over 2 days. August 26th, began play, and I think there was 2 games going on. And last Saturday, it completed, and lo and behold, Westfield wins the whole tournament.
Wait a second. Westfield won their own
They
tournament?
did. A little sketchy, but when you look at the stats, I mean, they completely dominated. And they're 6-0 this year. In 6 games, they've scored 41 goals.
Wow.
So, I mean, they're pretty much scoring at will.
Yeah, but didn't they score half those goals against Wakefield?
That's true. That's true. But
They beat them, what, like 16 to?
I think it was 16-0. I think they beat another team 9-0.
That's
So-
crazy.
And there's just even enough time in a field hockey game to score 16 goals. I can't understand.
Did this happen in their tournament? Did they count by 2s and not tell anybody?
and they were adding field goals. But they beat Robinson in the finals 2-1. Robinson, I think, is another good team, another Concord District team. So that's a Concord District rivalry in brewing right there.
And that's the thing about, Fairfax has always had sort of a competitive field hockey program. Robinson's always been very competitive in field hockey. Those 2 teams moved to the Concord, where you already have Westfield and Chantilly and Centerville usually. It's pretty good. I mean, it's a pretty, very, very strong field hockey district now. There's no
Chantilly
question about
finished 3rd in the tournament, so I mean they had a good
that. Oh,
effort.
and Oakton, of course, obviously. I want
Oakton's
to
been
short shift them.
So Concord, and like in football, they're strong in field hockey.
There you go.
Well, I mean, you got a couple Concord teams that have already branched out and played some Liberty teams. McLean, I think, plays Westfield tonight in a Wednesday in a game. We'll find out the score obviously tomorrow. But McLean has opened up the season 0-2. But one thing of note, they are playing under former coach and now assistant director of student activities, Demby Bambury has returned. She's replacing the coach that replaced her, who's now pregnant and coaching the JV team until she comes back. So that spot will still be available. But one other thing to mention in Liberty field hockey is that TJ is in town, and everybody's quite worried about
Oh,
them.
yeah.
But Marshall, I've been harping on Marshall for some
the
reason, but
Marshall
hey,
show.
it is. It's the Marshall show. Let me give you one more tidbit about Marshall. They beat Centerville in week 1 in a 1-0 victory, which was described to me by the athletic director Bill Curran over there as David slaying Goliath. So I don't think it could be said any better than that. So.
Well, another Marshall news. No, by the way, this is the second week with these shirts. Did you get any feedback? I was told that we look we look very, very studious and very clean cut and uniformed in these.
Well, we look uniform.
I know.
So all three of us.
We're like triplets.
Well, I can't say what I was told about them unless we have a bleep button.
I don't think we can afford a bleep button. You should dye your hair though, so you can kind of match both of us.
Well, you should get a white T-shirt so you can match both of us.
Oh man, that is so, Cross country this weekend, the Monroe Parker Invitational. It's sort of the unofficial kickoff of the Northern Region season. A lot of teams are already in action, but this kind of serves as the big jumping off point for all the Northern Region teams. So it should be said that usually Oakton and usually Herndon kind of skip it or put in some B-level runners into this thing. They don't usually bring their best to the Monroe Parker. And Jefferson, according to Lake Braddock coach Mike Mangan, is expected to also kind of bring half their team to the Monroe Parker. So it's not necessarily the cream of the crop, as it were, in cross country, but it's still a lot of really great runners and a lot of really deep teams. Brad Saragusa from Chantilly was the regional champion last year, is expected to again be the best male athlete in cross country in the Northern Region. Mike Spooner from West Springfield is going to give him a good race, and there are a couple of other guys in the region that are going to be able to challenge. On the girls' side, for the first time, and I can't even remember how long, it's wide open. I mean, Melissa Dewey graduating from Hayfield opens the door, and there isn't really an elite runner, per se, in the Northern Region to kind of jump up and take that mantle as being the person who's going to win every race, no matter what race it is. So you have Erin Klein from Lake Braddock, you've got Alexis Deegan from Westfield, and a slew of other, Jessica Trappini from Fairfax, who really had an impressive showing in outdoor track at the state championships. And it's going to be an interesting year, especially when you consider that Fairfax is ranked, I think, 11th in the state right now. Very deep, good team. Oakton, obviously, very, very good, deep team on the girls' side. So, and you never know about Lake Braddock. Lake Braddock has two great runners back in Klein and Michelle Presley. And then they have a lot of younger athletes that are kind of filling in the holes. But again, that's Braddock for you. I mean, they always seem to have reinforcements, and you can never count them out when it comes to the team competition.
And I'm really interested to see how Saragusa does. I know in spring track he kind of faded towards the end of the season. I don't know if it was injury related, but I know he really struggled there towards the postseason in the spring. So I'm interested to see what times he puts up early this year. And
on the boys' side, Jefferson seems to be the pick everyone has as far as the boys' team title for the region and maybe even for the state. West Springfield is also a team to watch. They have a very good top two, and they're a very good deep team. And the thing about them is they always seem to be ready to play in the postseason, and you can't take that for granted when you're dealing with cross country, because it's all about the end of the season in cross country. It's all about the Monroe Parker, and you get a bunch of other stuff, and then you get to districts and regionals at Burke Lake, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun, and it looks really wide open in a lot of ways this year.
Hope we get some good weather.
Oh, good weather is always a good thing, my friend. Want to talk about now some news that came down from the state regarding evacuees from Hurricane Katrina that might have made their way up to Virginia from the Gulf Coast. The state was really quick to rule that these folks, if they come to a VHSL school, that they're going to be eligible to play fall sports right off the bat. And they're going to have to, obviously these schools are doing it on good faith. They're eventually going to have to go back and find medical records, birth certificate, that sort of thing. But if that stuff isn't available right away, it's sort of like a good faith thing to bring these kids into the schools and allow them to compete, allow them to get an education. We had a good debate about that as far as people going down to the Gulf Coast, not only from high school but from colleges, to find athletes.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we had a nice debate about it. But I mean, I guess my concern is more in the college level of what coaches are doing. Obviously, there was a report on ESPN about one coach trying to fend off a couple recruiters from a star, player. And to me, and this is at the college level, I'm not talking about high school right now, because little disclaimer here, okay? If you're in high school and your family is displaced, and you get another chance to move somewhere else and start a life and make a life for yourself and recuperate, no problem. Coach recruiting, no matter what, just go for it, But in college, it's a little different because not all the families are living with those players. You're off, you're out of school, you may be able to go back home. You have options, okay? But if you're just, coaches out there recruiting players during a time of crisis, it kind of, it gets me a little bit upset. I know you have a different thought on, why things are happening, but, I think it's I think it's coaches taking advantage of a situation that players have been put in. And I don't know if I was a player at a college and a coach came up to me and said, come and, play for my team. You'll have a place to go to school and you won't have to worry about, taking classes at another campus and playing a weird schedule on the road all the time. And it would be enticing because I had that option. But I don't think the option should even be there. I don't think coaches should be even doing that. And obviously the high school level is different. But I know you have a different thought on that.
Well, I do, and we should say before getting into this that when it comes to the high school level, Paul Jansen, the coordinator of student activities for Fairfax County Public Schools, made it quite clear that you can't, if you're a coach or an administrator or a parent or a student athlete, make a call to a family down in Louisiana and say, come up here. It's illegal and it's frowned upon and you shouldn't do it.
But there's nothing they can really do.
The process to police that takes so long that by the time you get into it, and it involves finding witnesses and things like that, the season's already done.
You've had 11 weeks of football and probably 10 touchdowns from the kid from Louisiana.
But from a college perspective, I don't have a problem with coaches going down there and trying to do what you just said, trying to find kids that maybe don't have a chance to play this year because they don't have a team to play for, and trying to bring them to another university. I mean, I think if the bottom line is that student is going to be taken care of educationally, going to be taken care of financially, and that it's not going to be a case where they're going to go from a situation to a bad situation, fine by me. I don't want to say fair game, but to me, it's in the best intentions of the athlete to better themselves in an opportunity like that. And it should be said, by the way, that the NCAA did not allow any athletes from Tulane to transfer for the fall semester.
Look, I understand what you're saying, but I mean, these coaches aren't going down to Louisiana out of the kindness of their heart to help people out. They're going looking for players that can help their team win. So that's where I have the problem.
But I think that's the same in any case when you go for recruiting for any other reason. They're not going to the kid in inner city of Chicago to say, hey, let me take you out of here because I feel bad for you. He's thinking, hey, this kid could give me 20 wins a season. So I mean, you kind of have to weigh it.
It's different though because the kid isn't already signed and committed with one school. He's part of a program at that school. And when things go bad, it shouldn't be everybody just up and leave. I mean, stick around, try to make things happen for the school and for where you're at. I mean, what are you? And I'm not going to say, the kids. But I mean, what are you teaching? What are you teaching? If people just jump and ship at the sign of adversity, what are you teaching right there? I don't think that's a good way of going about. And obviously we already know that this happens in college. Kids are enticed, and even to the pro level. You lose players from colleges.
But I agree, and I'll agree with you in the sense that I think that this is an extraordinary circumstance. I think you're dealing with a completely different set of emotions here than you would be in another situation. It's one thing to grow up in the projects. It's another thing to be living in cholera-infested water. In the middle of New Orleans. So from that perspective, I understand it. But I just think that a good education, housing, financial situation taken care of, all of that is a byproduct of what could, in some way, shape, or form, be considered to be sort of an unscrupulous, partnership. I mean, if you have a coach asking a kid to come and move to play for his team, that is kind of shady. But if the end result is that he gets good housing, good education, financial situation taken care of, if he can better himself
and scores 23 points a game.
But if he can go from one college to another college, who's to say that's a bad decision?
Well, for the kid individually, it's not a bad decision, and you got to take it on a case-by-case basis. But overall, I think it's kind of shady. I mean, if you're looking at it from the player's perspective, and I understand that.
Right.
I don't think you should stay in cholera-infested water just so you can help your team win either.
Right.
But I mean, I'm just saying, these kids have options. They've been put somewhere else. It may be inconvenient, but there's people that are a lot worse off than they are, and not even in the sports world in that area. Speaking of which, I think we have a graphic that we made up of where you can help to send anything that you may want to send. Obviously, you want to send to the American Red Cross Disaster Relief Fund. That's 1-800-HELP-NOW, or go to the Red Cross website at www.redcross.org. If you also want to bring anything by the Connection newspapers, we're in McLean, Virginia. We have somebody who's going to take all of that and take it to their church, and any goods. They have a list here that you can bring. You can bring items needed for donation are large, heavy tarps, plywood, generators, small AC window units, fans, extension cords, and obviously, those are some pretty big donations, but you can make, any donations you like with water and canned goods and those sorts of things, bottled water, undergarments, socks, t-shirts, shorts, diapers, baby wipes. Somebody knows somebody affected by this, and I'm sure everybody's been affected in some way. We had some local kids from around here.
Yeah,
down
I had a
there
couple
that
of
you had a chance
locals on the girls soccer team at Tulane, who all of a sudden are now enrolled at Texas A&M. They're still playing for Tulane. They're still representing Tulane. Tulane decided to go ahead and play fall sports, football, girls soccer, a lot of other sports. But they managed to place all of those student athletes at 5 different universities. So the football players are now attending classes at Louisiana Tech. Women's soccer now attending classes at Texas A&M. And it's amazing. It's amazing to think that throughout all of this, that there was that sort of organization, and not only that, but that sort of open-heartedness on the part of other schools to bring in close to 400 athletes from Tulane to take classes and share in the facilities. I think it's really a testament to how great people can be in the face of adversity like this, to kind of open their hearts and really help out someone in need.
Yeah. I mean, George Mason University right down the street is doing that. They're accepting local kids who may have gone to schools in New Orleans or any of the destructed areas. They can take classes here in Fairfax, stay home with their family. Hopefully some of them weren't already down there. But, if anything good came out of it, it's that, people are branching out and helping
Absolutely.
out. So.
And speaking of disasters, the Fairfax Sports Report, I should mention, is available on your television screen Wednesdays at 10, Thursdays at 7, and Fridays at 12 p.m. on Cox Cable Channel 10. News and commentary from local sports insiders, and that's us. Want to mention the high school game of the week next week. This week. It's the Madison at Oakton, the big Outback Challenge Bowl. The games there Saturdays at 6 on Cox 35, and repeat daily at 5 a.m. and 6 p.m. That should be a very fun one to watch. FSN on the web. www.fairfaxsportsnetwork.com. Please check out the photo gallery. And also want to mention we've got a picks contest going on, don't we?
Yes, we sure do.
Absolutely. Check out the Connection newspaper, see what we picked, and then you can email in your picks to...
You can email them into the show. We have go ahead and email them into me, bjk@connectionnewspapers.com.
Fantastic. Quality Care Ford
me.
Service Center, thank you very much for underwriting us. Conveniently located in Fairfax, servicing all makes and models. 703-383-6299. And CCI Screen Printing for all of your screen printing needs, 703-978-0257. So there you have it.
We should say anybody who does score the highest record, sending in those picks to bjk@connectionnewspapers.com, we will mention your name on the Fairfax Sports Report
Absolutely.
every week.
There you go. Picks at fairfaxsportsnetwork.com. So email it there,
email
it to BJ.
Yeah, email it to
Doesn't
picks
matter.
at fairfaxsportsnetwork.com.
No, email it to BJ.
Or me. Hey, why not? Boom
Haikus,
goes the dynamite, huh?
poetry, whatever you want to send, really. Send it to BJ.
Yeah.
Funny forwards.
Don't send me forwards.
That picture of the squirrel where it's all frazzled and it says, hang in there.
My mother sends me forwards and I don't read them. She yells at me.
Thanks for watching, everybody.